Alright, yo, what's good guys? This is JFZ and welcome back to Let's Talk. For today's discussion, we're going to take a look at Cybernetic Crescent by Codex, Shoxidian, Rustam, Fertifunky, Galvatron, Nazca, Viprin, Enzor, Samifying, Black, the Devon, Serpunge, Heinz, Terran, Floppy, First GD, and Zelsper. I also just want to point out that I'm sorry that I haven't really released a video in like over 2 months, let alone a Let's Talk. But I got one that's a little interesting for you today, so let's just get right into it. I remember when the preview for this level first came out in like 2019, and despite how horrible the editing for the previews were, it didn't really look that bad, you know? I'm actually one of those people who think that they should have waited for 2.2 to come out, since the first 2 levels were some of the biggest collabs for their updates. Like, you know, how Artificial was in 2.0 and Digital being 2.1. And then I completely forgot about this level until it was verified not too long ago. And I gotta say, what? I mean, don't get me wrong, some of the parts are actually really cool, but others are kind of just okay, I guess. I also want to point out that I'm not going to be reviewing the level's atmosphere, since Viprin has something to say about everything and insists that this level doesn't have a theme, which I'll respect, since the first 2 didn't really have one either. So with all that being said, let's just get right into it. Let's begin. This time gameplay is going to be a bit hard because I'm clearly not good enough to beat this monstrosity, and neither is my usual gameplay reviewer work. So I'm just going to have to go off what other people say, and just in general how the level looks visually. So right off the bat, many people say that this level is pretty inconsistent with gameplay, and certain parts are pretty fun. And I can see what they mean because some parts clearly look harder than the others. And I gotta say that the sync is pretty good, visually at least. It visually looks nice as well with a few exceptions, mainly Serpunge. Unfortunately, I've never really been a fan of Serpunge's gameplay, since it's quite repetitive and relies heavily on orbs and awkward timing, so I'm not going to bash the level too hard for it, since I don't have much of a say, so I'm going to give it a generous 8 out of 10. As I said earlier, I'm not going to talk about atmosphere since it's non-existent in this level. Cohesion is also just not a thing in the series, I guess, so I'm just going to get this out of the way. I'm not really a huge fan of this song. I personally think Creo is overrated and overused in Geometry Dash, so seeing that another hype mega collab uses a Creo song doesn't really surprise or please me. Also, I know a collab doesn't have to be cohesive in order to work, and that people should be allowed to express themselves, but damn, seriously, it feels like I'm playing 5 different levels at once sometimes. Since I won't be discussing atmosphere, I'm going to break down all the parts and my opinions on them, and I'm going to grade each part independently to give an accurate score in the end. I actually really like Codex's part. Not only is it reminiscent of the first 2 levels, but the colors and design are super clean. It's also pretty similar gameplay-wise, and I love it. So 10 out of 10 for sure, and a great way to start off the level. Next up, we got Shoxidian, and I'm really not a fan. I don't really like Shoxidian's work in general, especially his part in Molten Gear. It just looks outdated and messy. The colors are just kind of ugly to me. I'm never really a fan of creators who still try to build these 1.9 type styles because it just doesn't work for me, unless you know how to pull it off correctly. So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to give it a 2 out of 10. Now we have Rustam, and his part seems alright, but it's pretty inconsistent. You got some blocks that are decorated pretty well, but others have no decoration at all. Background is also pretty empty, and could probably do with some more air deco. The spinning hexagon things are cool, I guess, but they don't really fit, and the whole part just seems kind of rushed. So I'm just going to give it a 5 out of 10. Luckily, the level picks up with Fertifunky, and the movements are really cool and the designs are great. The colors are great too, and I love how the background has outlines of the blocks you're seeing in front of you. If there's just one thing I can complain about, it's that it's pretty empty, but I think the movement makes up for it, so I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Next up, holy crap. Galvatron was always one of my favorite creators and still is. This part is insane. It's unlike anything I've ever seen in this game before. It's like a really complex take on modern style, and I love it. It's easily my favorite in the entire level. I only have 2 small complaints with this part, and it's that it's a little hard to play since it's so trippy to tell what's what, and that it stands out way too much in this otherwise mediocre level, but I'm willing to look past these 2 things and I'll give it a 10 out of 10. Now we got Nazca, and I like his part, but it's honestly a bit underwhelming. Of course, I like that he made all the blocks have secret messages, and it's cool and all, but I like this part in Digital better. This just isn't as complex, which isn't a bad thing, since it's still a good part, but it's just not as good as it could have been. I still think it's decent, so I'm just going to give it a 7 out of 10 and move on. Next up is Viprin. Viprin. I'm not the biggest fan of it. The blocks are empty, and the ground spikes are kind of lazy to me. The colors and effects are good though, but again, His part in digital was better, and even then it was just alright. One thing I do like is the decoration around the orbs, but obviously it's not enough to save this part. Hell, not even Enzor was enough to save it. Yeah, Enzor helped with this part. I didn't even know that until someone told me, and after like 5 minutes I finally found his name. Why wasn't it featured like next to Viprin's name and just as visible as his? I mean, whatever, man, whatever. I was never really a fan of Viprin's work, and I know for a fact he's extremely overrated, but I'll put my bias aside and give it a 3 out of 10. Knowing me, I would have gave it a 1 out of 10 if I had to give my bias, but I have to give some credit where it's due. Moving on, we have good old Samifying. As you know, I have a special place in my heart for Samifying, and it's funny because it reminds me of the earlier parts of Setalus, which is alright. I know it's old, so I can't bash it too much for not being up to date, but it still looks pretty good. And again, it just doesn't really fit. But the colors are pretty good, the movement is great as always, and Sam just has a really cool style, so I'm just going to give it an 8 out of 10. Next up we got Black, and I've never been too much of a fan of his work, but this part isn't that bad actually. It's full and the design is pretty good, but I don't really like how static it is. I don't know if that's just part of his style or not, but I think movement would improve a lot. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Now we got the Devon, but real quick, I have to mention how smooth the transition between Black and Devon's part is. Anyway, there's a lot going on here. The design is a bit messy for my taste, and I know that's just how his style is, but otherwise it's pretty cool. It's always interesting to see parts that make you think you have to go one way, but actually go another, which he obviously knows how to do perfectly. He's practically yeeting our expectations, and I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10 for it. At the end of the drop, we have Sur Punch, and I really don't like this part at all. Sur Punch is usually good with this kind of stuff, but I really think he dropped the ball with this one. Not only are these some of the messiest effects I've ever seen, but I can't even see where the gameplay is like at all. You probably can with low detail mode, but seriously, this is just a mess. There's too much glow, too much top 3 layering, not enough detailing, too much black, all that stuff, you know? I guess I can say like the last 2 seconds of his part are the best, but that's just being generous. Unfortunately, I have to give it a 1 out of 10, because I really just don't like this part, no matter how hard I try to. Next up is Heinz, and I think it's alright, but I know he can do a lot better than this. I'm not a fan of the fact that it's pretty repetitive and just reuses the same cube type things, and the colors are alright, although some variety would be cool, which I know he's good at. Also, I know he doesn't normally use movement, but I can't help but point out how static it is, and for that, I'm just going to give him a 4 out of 10. Lastly is Terran, and it's obviously very reminiscent of his other works, which I like. I'm not the biggest fan of the colors, and the ending is a tad bit lazy in the sense that everything is white, but I love the design that Terran uses. I don't have too much to say about it, so I'll give this part a 7 out of 10. Oh, and one more thing. This end screen is like incredible, one of the best in the game, hands down. Seriously, Zalsberg, you killed it, I swear. End screens need so much more attention than they get, but I do have to point something out. Why did you put hosted by Viprin at the top? Like, dude, we know. Why is it the biggest thing on the screen besides the title itself? Dude, we know it's by Viprin. Anyway, 9 out of 10, 1 point off for stating the obvious. In the end, the decoration gets a 6.14 out of 10. I think it goes without saying that I believe this is the weakest of the 3 levels. It's really subpar in comparison to its predecessors, and the fact that it's mostly hype and not enough effort. It's always kind of annoying to see big names try to get away with rushed work because you know they can. I know this isn't always the case and not everyone is like that, but it is a thing and I hate when it happens. In this case, it isn't too bad, but I think it's a bit apparent. I'm really not that big of a fan of this level with a few exceptions, and I think it could have been so much more than what it is. And again, I personally think they would have benefited from waiting until 2.2's release for a few reasons, but that's a discussion for another day. So according to math, this level gets a... .07 out of 10. Alright, that's going to wrap up this video. As always, thanks for watching. Let me know what you want to see next. Feel free to throw your opinion down below and tell me what you liked or didn't like. Well, I'll catch you guys. Peace.